Well, good evening tonight. Glad you're all here tonight. This is our wonderful May. Gosh, it's actually sunny outside. I'm not sure. I thought I'd have to bring in extra lighting, etc. But we got it hooked up. That's how that works. We're having a great show for you tonight. 3 writers, all from different points of view and different perspectives. We've got Donn Stephenson, who has said that every night is a different perspective. So, and I appreciate that. He's honest about it. The rest of us just try to maintain some sort of a standard persona. That doesn't work for Donn. He sings everything, plays a few things here and there. My kind of guy. So Donn's been playing for a few years. If you check out his bio, he's been a busy guy the last 20 or 30 years, driving a train, hanging out with the railroad, and now the last 2 years he's been retired. So he's playing quite a bit more. So without further ado, Donn Stephenson.
Thank you, Rex, and it's really a pleasure to be here tonight. And I'm so thankful that I get to listen to all the great poets and authors that are here. And I really feel that it's an honor to be asked over here. It's a pleasure to play for you tonight. And I think I'm going to do 3 songs.
To start with.
I thought I should write something though this time instead of doing everybody else's songs. So we're going to try and do some of those. And it's been raining like he said, so this first song is it's not about me, but it's about some family members that were having some trouble, and well, you'll get the idea when I get into this. Outside it's raining, and I'm thinking write these down and look at them. I can't even remember my own songs, you know. I used to have a photographic memory, but I ran out of film, so that's why I do this. Believe it or not, I practiced these this week. I mean, that's the basic thing. Now, this is a fictional story, and it's about a couple of bad guys, which we grew up in a real tough neighborhood, and we used to be bad guys ourselves, but we weren't this bad, I guess. Although I did have some friends that didn't get straightened out the way they should have, and somehow they didn't take me with them. So this is a little song about being a desperado. I don't think I want to be an outlaw. I'm going to do one more, and then I think you're going to get your people up here, aren't you, probably? Yeah. Okay, all right. Well, I got my wife Nancy with me tonight, and we've got a nice little granddaughter that's 9 years old. She's going to be 9 in another month. And her and I are pals. We play together and get along real good and everything. She's the first girl in our family for forever, I guess. I don't know. So we've had nothing but boys. And so it was a real thrill to have her. And we love her so much that I wrote this song for her.
Donn Samuelson will be back sometime around the end of the show. Thank you, Donn. The railroad just has to suffer without you. We're glad you're out here doing more playing with some of your groups around town. Donn plays in a number of places. I'm familiar with him from here and from Gratitude Cafe, and then also occasionally down at Crescent Moon. So he's all over town, so look for that name, and it's D-O-N-N, so that distinguishes you from all the other Donn Samuelsons that I know about. So don't go to the other ones, they're fake. We don't want to do that. As I said, we've got a lot going on tonight. We're glad to have visitors here in town. We have Greg and Greg in the back. And one Greg, yes, there they are, the two Gregs, Kosmiski and Kuzma. They came here to hang out and see what we're doing, and generally offer what I call verbal criticism, but very, very light and very kind. They're retired now. Ignore what he just said. We're glad to see him. Also tonight, my friend Ed Stevens came to read, and he will be getting up next, but he brought along his wife and his daughter, and he brought along Don Welch's widow, Marcia Welch, and I'm so glad to have Marcia here. It just really makes me feel great. Don Welch, of course, passed away, and we had a great memorial for him, and a number of readings around the state, one here and one in Kearney. It was a wonderful time. His book is out. You can look for it on probably Amazon and one of the other services. Don is a guy that hung out quite often at the coffee shop there in Kearney. And then another place he hung out, especially the last couple of years, even though he wasn't really an official teacher anymore, he went back in and taught some writing classes and took the kids down to Ed Stevens' bookstore. So he was always happy to see everyone. He hosted a number of great readings at his bookstore. That's where I also met the fellow that was eventually the editor for Don's anthology. Dwayne read there, a number of people. So what a great place. Kearney will sorely miss and is missing Bookend's bookstore. So Ed is a guy that's been hanging around Kearney for a long time. He said he went out east and got a master's degree at one time and went to work in Washington, D.C., and that was not for him. So he went back to Good Samaritan Hospital in Kearney and spent his career there, and along the way acquired an awful lot of books, and even more than me. Now you have to tell my wife that. That's amazing. She says she doesn't believe it. So Ed Stevens is with us tonight. He's going to read and talk, and if you have any questions, wave your hand, and maybe he can answer it. Maybe he can't. I don't know, but he'll give it a good shot. So my friend, Ed Stevens.
Yeah, okay.
So dive in there.
No, I'll stand. Good evening. Rex, thank you for inviting me here. I appreciate it. Thanks also to the folks here at Mojava for providing a place for those of us who are addicted to this sort of thing. A place to get together and hear and be heard. I love that sound of that Martin guitar that Don just played. I'm an old guitar player, sort of. Anyway, I want to thank everybody. I especially want to thank you folks for being here. Those of us on the mic tonight made a commitment to be here, so we kind of have to be. You folks all chose to be here, and that's important. I'm from Kearney, as I said, and I don't have a lot of writing credentials. My background is scientific and medical and that sort of thing. Where I come from, it was not considered cool to like poetry. So I kind of kept it to myself until I got old enough to where I didn't give a damn anymore. So anyhow, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. As I say, I'm a UNL graduate, born and bred in Nebraska, lived almost all of my life in central Nebraska and north central Nebraska in the Sand Hills. Great place to be from. If any of you have been up there, you know what I mean. I tend to write two kinds of poetry. One I refer to as the geographical kind, and that is, I've always thought that a good poem should create some sort of mental geography for the listener, a place where they can wander around in on their own and learn what they want to from it. The other kind of stuff I write is more a narrative, more of a storytelling. I call it the history side, so I have history and geography because I like balance. I'll read a little bit of both of those tonight, and hopefully you'll find something in them that is useful. Rex mentioned Dwayne's speaker. I read a critique or a criticism that he did of, I think it was Neil Harrison's book, where Dwayne talked about that poetry puts us on hiking trails that are ordinarily closed off to us, and good poetry should do that. So I hope you find a new trail a little bit tonight. I want to start out with I need to say one other thing. Everything I write is true. Everything you hear is true except for the parts that aren't. I was fortunate enough to attend a seminar that Ted Kuzer put on a few years ago down in Seward. He used to do a benefit down there at the church, and I and my daughter over here was at it, and this poem came out of that session. I hope you enjoy it. It's called "The Pipe I Smoked." The pipe I smoked when I was young was a scarred and battered friend, chewed, scorched, and caked over 20 years to a venerable state of resinous dilapidation. It smelled and gurgled and was warm in my pocket right next to my heart. I paid $8 for it at Cliff's Smoke Shop in 1958. He threw in a little folding scraper tamper gadget, a shiny Zippo, and 2 pouches of Mixture 79. Berry sweet, leather smooth, willow cool. Properly filled, it would burn for an hour with never a bitter aftertaste. Every couple of days it needed a reaming with a pipe cleaner, but asked nothing else. That old briar saw me through graduate school, several jobs, the birth of 3 children, and a minor midlife crisis. Sometime in the 70s, when health became fashionable, my doctor said I'd have to put it down, like an old dog. He spoke of tars and carcinogens and cholesterol and genetic predisposition. Turns out my gene pool is suspect. The strands of my DNA are festooned with lurking impurities like strings of imperfect Mardi Gras beads. Hateful little dollops of amino acids sloshing around in my unsuspecting innards, patiently waiting for a nudge from a nicotine molecule to explode into a full-blown thrombosis or tumor or some other horribiloma. So I gave up my trusted pal. I laid it down for good, with a half-burned dottle of sweet Cavendish still on board. Tucked it into a cedar box with the Zippo and the gadget. I buried it with full honors and sternly instructed my heirs to plant me right next to it. Thank you. Rex spoke of Don Welch, and you'll hear me speak of him more than once tonight. Don was a good friend and a wonderful, wonderful poet. And he used to come into the bookstore, and he was often kind enough to read some of the things that I'd scratched out. And this next poem always makes me think of Don because he had a piece of it. The bookstore that I had was downtown in Kearney, and there was an old black mama cat that lived down in the downtown. She lived in the sewers, and you would see her every morning. I'd go down there, and she was scared. She would run away, you know, but she was always there, just like a ghost almost. And I became fascinated with her, and I eventually wrote a poem about her. And I worked hard on it, and I got all done, and it wasn't too bad, and I wanted a title that was, you know, something heroic, something that would emphasize the survival nature of this cat, something, you know, huge. And I can't even remember now what I came up with, but I did something. And Don came in about that time, and I handed him the poem, and I said, "What do you think of this?" And he read it over and reached in his pocket and took out his pen, made one mark on it, and wrote down a word, 2 words. And he handed it back to me, and He said, it's a good poem, but I didn't like the title. And he wrote down the title, Downtown Cat. And so I thought about, you know, how many awards he's won and how many books he's published and how many years he taught. And I didn't have any statues of me on the Kearney of UNK, on the campus of UNK. And so I compared me to him, and I decided to stick with the title of Downtown Cat. This is the poem. I saw her again this morning, a haunt-eyed wraith, licorice black, quick as a gasp, skimming the bricks, hugging the walls, slipping from shadow to shadow, plying the pools of darkness like an eel. Ears permanently peaked, slitted eyes glowing with the watchfires that never dim. The arc of her day begins and ends in the refuse of the city. She knows light as a goblin. Subterranean hunter, alley stalker, parapet daredevil. Strikes sharp and sudden as a pang of conscience. Leaves a teeny clutch of bones or feathers, a grisly shrine to her primal ways. She moves in an ecstatic rage of pure will. Brick silent, while around her rises a coagulum of unchecked sound, an urban oral phlegm. She runs at peace, the pendant agonies of the wild road accepted, if not chosen. She can shrink to nothing, then reappear like fog. She seeks respite now within the bricks, her low swaying belly a furry tumor swollen with the unsought fruit of mindless instinct. And soon in the clear cold night she will bathe her brood in her love and her skills, and if the downtown gods are good, they will become her, each one a survivor. Downtown Cat. Thank you. My wife and I are lucky enough to get to travel a fair amount. And I don't know, 3-4 years ago, she says, you know, I've never been to Yellowstone. And I said, oh God, everybody's got to go to Yellowstone. So we got in the car and went to Yellowstone. And we had a great time out there, stayed at the Old Faithful Inn and did a lot of things. And I don't move around as much or as fast as I once did, so more than once on that trip, she would walk off to go see something, you know, another mud pot or a geyser or something, and I'd just stay behind. And it was on one of those trips that this sort of the embryo of this poem was born, and it took almost 2 years to finish it. But I finally did, and this is the first time I've ever read this poem in public. I hope you enjoy it. It's called Yellowstone. I'm sorry, I got to put on glasses. I'm just not that. I didn't used to be vain. Yellowstone. We crawl across her ancient breast, breathe her vapors and probe her sulphurous wounds. She reclines atop a cauldron of her own steaming afterbirth, her aspen cloak a tremble in the winding wind. Blue mountains crosscut a pallid sky, dull sentinels, their granite feet anchors in the yellow afternoon. The prairie is a skin of browning memory with scars and purpose, fading into the winter of time. Plodding buffalo, great shaggy, slow-eyed emboli that clog her asphalt arteries, as bear and moose and dancing coyotes peevishly await the waning of the human flood. Throngs of bickering ravens hold raucous debates in the thickening evening pines, while plovers tuck their bedtime young into cradles of moss and thistledown, and loons lament and giggle in their watery cattail darks. Life is old, but not as old as the sounds of air and water. For generations unnumbered, they have sung her to sleep. I mentioned Donn, and Rex said it was okay if I read one of his poems.
Or two.
Or 2, or 6, or 19. Donn has got, how many books has he got, Marcia? 20, 25, something like that. This is one of his smallest and by any measure my favorite. If you don't have this book, get it. It's called The Alley Poems. Donn spent a long time walking around Kearney up and down the alleys and things a few years ago. And each one of those walks produced a poem, and each one is a gem. The nice thing about reading one of Donn's books is you don't have to pick through to find the poem you like. You can just open the book and it's there. This has long been one of my favorites. It's called Southside Recess. This poem, in something like 18 lines, tells a wonderful story. It's called Southside Recess. A 4th grade boy has just wrestled down a girl and taken off her shoes. Now he's dancing around like a Scot as if the shoes in his hands were the heads of Englishmen, civilized trophies. The girl in pink socks can't get up. There are too many stickers in her part of the world. And the boy, now picked, is screaming blue oaths from the top of the swings. Here comes the Hague, the teacher from the International Court of 4th grade tribunals. Having just cleared the kindergartner, she's coming on strong, her flesh holding her back, bouncing around, and only her mouth is hurrying. Southside Recess. Before I came down here, I got a call from Rex, and he said, I just wanted to remind you to bring some of your books along. And I said, Rex, I don't have any books. So I don't know how I'm going to do that.
Yeah, one.
And
Two left.
so I actually have, I've never submitted books for publication because I have a constitutional aversion to rejection. I just can't put up with it. But I did self-publish a couple, and I wanted to make you aware of them. One is poems. It's called Hymns, Cantos, and Orphans. The other is a book of short stories. And you can download either one of those books for free on lulu.com. Everybody know what Lulu is? You're aware of that? Just look up Ed Stevens. These things will be there. You can download a PDF. Now, for those of you who just have to have a bound and printed book, you can actually buy this on there too. I think it's like $7 or something. I don't make anything off of it. That's what it costs to print the thing. But if it was me, I'd go for the free one. That's up to you. Anyway, those of us who write sometimes fall prey to the false notion that our teenage years are just of tremendous interest to other people. And it's just universally untrue. But I did fall prey to that. And you have to listen to it now because you agreed to come here. I grew up and went to school in a small town called Myrna, Nebraska. Anybody know where Myrna is? And the high point of the season, in fact, the only point of the season, as I think about it, was the prom. You all remember the prom? And all of our proms had themes to them. You know, under the sea and all this kind of stuff. Our senior prom's theme was Evening in Paris. And the only girl in school that had even a shot of artistic talent was a girl named Jean Clay, and she made a picture of a big Eiffel Tower about 9 feet tall and cut it out and covered it with aluminum foil. We called it tin foil back then. And put it up, and that was our decoration, some crepe paper. And this is a story that came from my prom. It's called Evening in Paris. Evening in Paris, crepe paper sky. We stalked and strolled on a polished gym floor. In the shadow of a tinfoil Eiffel Tower, we feverishly balanced our burdens of cherished ignorance to the crooning of faceless, coffee-colored men who sang of Rose in Spanish Harlem and warned us to save the last dance for someone. I held her like she was a pot of scalding water. She in an acre of crinkly organdy and purple shimmering taffeta. I in gray suede loafers, charcoal slacks and shirt, smartly accessorized with a belt and tie of jolting pink. I looked like a cross between Lucky Luciano and Porter Wagner. We were young, old, and scorned the world outside ourselves, at once craving and disdaining the trappings of maturity. We danced in a golden arena, a Stonehenge of latticed sound, exulting in our callousness. Our looming adulthood was but a 5 o'clock shadow on the jaw of our heedless, harmless joy. We were edged tools sharpening ourselves against each other. We were flesh thermometers assaying each other's heat and energy, measured on a scale incomprehensible to those younger and older. Later, we would retire to the back seats of 41 Fords and 48 Plymouths to fan the kindled embers into rich and grasping flame. In the 55 summers since that night, I've never once been as smooth, as clever, as cool hot, as green and pliant, as juiced, as dazed, as fire-free, as careless, as bursting, as loose, as tightly wrapped, as glowing, as intrepid, as complete as I was that night.
Amen.
I would go back in a heartbeat, but I wouldn't stay. Thank you. I have about 163 more here. I don't think I'll get to more than half of them. So. I don't often write about or 2 or 4 other people, and there's a number of reasons for that. Mainly, I don't have enough skill, enough smarts, enough love to write to people as honestly as I'd like to. But from time to time, I've given it a try. And these last 3 are actually poems about and to and for people, and I'd like to share them with you. One more mention of Don Welch. We lost Don last August, and there are people who can undergo things and sit down the next day. It takes months, sometimes years, for something to gel for me. I wrote a poem for Don, and it only has been done for a couple of months now, and I don't know if it's done or not, but I'd like to read you what it is today. It's called Brother Owl. I can't think of Don without thinking of birds. I don't know how many of you know about Don, but he wrote about birds. He is the white blackbird, the sandhill cranes, the meadowlarks, all kinds of things, and of course pigeons. How could I forget pigeons? And so when I think of Don, stuff like this sometimes happens. This is called Brother Owl, and it's for Don. Has an epigram from Ralph Waldo Emerson that says, "Precisely in proportion to the depth of mind from which it issued, so high does it soar, so long does it sing." He plies the silver heights in gray and soaring rhythms, gilds the quavering treetops with his simple feathered grace. He holds us close to feel his warmth, to touch his healing radiance. Our dawn is his becoming. He shines that we might see horizons clear and bright. He breathes that we might feel again the kneading pulse of life. He sings that we might hear anew and rise above our dreams. He bids us sit with him and know a higher rest. Prince of birds, wizard of words, Brother Owl, for Don. Thank you. This next one is also for somebody, most important person in my life, lady over here in the purple sweater who's put up with me for more than 40 years. We just had our 30th anniversary day before yesterday. You should be applauding her.
They were.
That's right.
She washes my clothes and makes my bed, and my God, even puts money in my checking account from time to time so I can keep doing stuff like this. I love her a lot. This is for Diane. It's called The Secret of Sunshine. The secret of sunshine is in the not knowing, in the tumble of snowflakes, in the shine of her eyes. The promise of words is the swell of becoming, the bloom of my reaching blown away in a cloud of dry imaginings. The secret of sunshine falls ripe from the heavens, in the richness of breezes, in the peace of her heart. Teardrops are raindrops distilled by long yearning. I stand witless, my thoughts slack and formless like the seat of an old man's pants. The secret of sunshine seems to favor the springtime. It coaxes the lilies and glows bright in her smile. We went laughing and flaming, now a bed of warm embers. The music slows, and she hums the secret of sunshine as we dance in the dark. This last poem, I don't ordinarily write two-page poems. I can't keep a train of thought going that long. But this one started out as a short story. And I worked on it for weeks, and it just would not come together. And I showed it again to Donn. And he said, well, that's not a short story, that's a prose poem. And so I took it back, and about 20 minutes later discovered that he was right. The thing just fell together like one of these pop-up tents that you throw on, and it was perfect. This is about three people, actually. It involves three people, three men. One of them, I took his name for the title. Another one I took for his appearance. And the third one I took for the experience of his life. And that third one was my uncle, who I lost 7 or 8 years ago. He was very dear to me. He was also crazy. God, I love the man. And I hope you'll find out why as we go through this. The name of the poem is called John Roby. In the end, he said, all you have left are your stories. He sat forward in the sagging chair and glanced up at me under arched brows, spread his feet a bit, settled his weight on the worn heels of his scuffed boots, heaved himself to a standing position. He stood there for a few seconds, shivered slightly like a young cottonwood in a breeze. One hand reached behind him, rested on the arm of the chair just vacated, steadied his slightly hunched over form. The other hand, with the faded blue anchor and the USMC still visible on skin brown with the sun of 80 summers, passed quickly over his eyes, eyes that were crow-bright, searching, wondering. He settled his greasy Stetson on the frazzle of gray, and then stiff-legged, bow-legged, he made for the door. He wore a much-mended chambray shirt, dirty gabardine trousers stiffened by time, the inseams and pocket edges shiny with the accretions of age and neglect. A worn leather belt with a tarnished belt buckle the size of a small hubcap. He was 5'7" and shrinking, weighed just north of 145. He still had 20/10 vision in both eyes. He could hear a butterfly's stomach growl at 50 feet. Yeah, John Roby had some stories. He had chased longhorns spookier than deer through the Texas scrub mesquite before he had whiskers to shave. He sat a horse with the practiced ease of an Eastern pasha in a sedan chair. He could grab a rattlesnake by the tail and snap its head off in one smooth whip-like motion. Those who had seen him track the Garrison brothers across 85 miles of slate-hard desert back in '35 swore he was part Indian, but in fact he was full-boiled Scotch-Irish. And he had the fiddling and jigging skills to prove it. The week after Pearl Harbor, he joined the rush, figuring to go Navy because he'd never seen the ocean. Whether through carelessness, confusion, or collusion, he signed the wrong papers in the wrong enlistment center and wound up as a Marine. He simply shrugged, figuring sooner or later the Corps would get him close to the bad guys. He was right. The Marines gave him a bed, 3 meals a day, and the best clothes he'd ever owned. They also gave him a rifle and taught him how to use it Marine style. For the next 4 years, he worked his way across a succession of Pacific islands with unpronounceable names. Gained 18 pounds, contracted gonorrhea once, earned 2 Purple Hearts, made corporal 3 times, and was waiting to knock on Tojo's front door in Tokyo when the Air Force lit up Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 3 months later, he's back in West Texas with $38 left of his mustering out pay and slim prospects. Over the next 5.5 decades, he wildcatted in an Oklahoma oil patch, hauled gravel down in Cut and Shoot, picked peaches in Colorado, and lived with a New Orleans stripper named Faylene for a winter, stacked hay in the sand hills of Nebraska, drove an 18-wheeler in every state in the lower 48 except Vermont, got in 71 fights, with and without knives, worked for 22 different construction outfits, ran naked in the middle of the night out of a burning whorehouse, operated every piece of road building machinery ever invented, never killed a man accidentally, rode in over 100 rodeos, washed off a shrimp boat in a Gulf squall and nearly drowned, got married 3 times and divorced twice, was thrown in jail 24 times, never went skiing, wrecked 3 pickups and a motorcycle, dived off a bridge 40 feet into the Brazos River on a bet, lost the only watch he ever owned in a back alley crap game, broke 11 bones, ran over several armadillos, had a few hundred stitches, got drunk occasionally, outlived 6 dogs and his last wife, wore out 16 pairs of boots, and smoked a hay rack load of Bull Durham. Yeah, John Roby had some stories. As he was leaving, I asked him if he could have anything in the world, what he'd choose. He opened the screen door slightly, then turned, smiled, and said, "Yesterday." Thank you very much. You bet.
Let's have another hand for Ed Stevens and John Roby. And I do thank you again for all those years of bookends and stories. And pretty good coffee too, you know. We drank some coffee. There are a number of us went out and read at Bookends. We've heard a lot of people from around that area, and some people that accidentally, maybe on purpose, showed up there to read. We're not sure. But we had a great time. So Kearney, Nebraska is still home, and Ed and Diane are traveling a bit. I think their daughter said she's moving to Lincoln soon. So it's a wonderful world. I thank Marcia for being here. It's a great poem about some owl or another. I guess that's a great image to hold in your head about Donn. He was always staring at some bird, and I'm sure the owl was staring back. That's how that works. Our next reader, before we take a break, our next reader will be Jennifer Gray, G-R-A-Y. I met Jennifer 6 or 7 years ago when she came into Crescent Moon and kind of got hooked on the idea of poetry, of reading poetry, of writing poetry, and maybe she should start writing a little poetry again. So she went back to school, and through a variety of paths and patterns and doorways and desks and people, she has finally emerged with a master's degree in creative writing. So thank you for completing that approach. We really do appreciate it. And now she's going to, I guess you would call this a combination of a workshop and a reading. As we've talked, as I've talked with Ed before, just getting up here and reading a poem is not worth it, as far as I'm concerned. You've got to get up and talk about the poem. You've got to talk about what was happening in your life to a degree when that poem showed up. So maybe some people you've run into, either in class or, as in your case, you have this uncle that is just absolutely awe-inspiring. Those things are what create poems and what make them happen and make them show up. So Jennifer's going to read a bit. If you have any questions, raise your hand. This is kind of a classroom. Or if a comment, try to fit it in between a couple of things that she's reading, as far as that goes. And I'm not making her nervous enough. Am I?
Yeah, no pressure.
No pressure. No pressure at all. Jennifer, please come up.
Okay, well, the story is I wrote poetry, and that was really all I thought I would do. And then I took a fiction workshop, and the professor, Jonas, said, you should switch to fiction. Just start doing fiction. Well, I had no fiction. I had never written any. So I switched, but what that meant was I was writing it and then workshopping it right away. And I don't know how many of you, a lot of you probably have experience with workshops, but sometimes they can be brutal as far as critiques. And I was writing, as Stephen King would say, with the door open. I had not done anything near a final draft, so I'm still learning a lot about fiction. But one of the best books I've ever read about it is Stephen King's On Writing, and I'm sure, yeah, some of you are nodding, it's a good book. But he gives a little writing exercise in there, so this is my response to his writing exercise about Dick and Jane. And mine is called A Little Bedtime Story about Dick and Jane. And I should preface this by saying, as a part-time job, I read court transcription. I'm a proofreader, and you would not believe the stuff that happens. Here's my story. A little bedtime story about Dick and Jane. The news anchor's breaking story dropped a bomb on his heart. She opened her monologue with a jailbreak and a female inmate on the loose, and Dick knew, he just knew, that Jane was free. He couldn't have said in that moment how he knew, but he knew. And if Jane was free, she was coming for him. Then, over the scent of his steeping peppermint tea, he smelled her. She was behind him. He felt his muscles stiffen into the petrification of terror and forced his head to turn so that he caught her movement in his peripheral vision. Still halfway up the stairs, now one step closer. She came down slowly. Why? Why so slow? His mind was jumping like a rabbit on the run for its life. He adjusted his position on the couch and put an arm up so that he could pull himself around and get a better beat on the situation. She was wearing a robe, his robe, her hair still slightly damp and curling where it brushed her shoulders. And she smelled good. She'd used his soap, but beneath the mannish scent of his body wash was that musk particular to her, animal and sexy and strong today. His blood was up, and so loud in his ears that he watched her lips to make sure he heard her if she spoke. He watched the posture of her body to try and determine whether she was here to finish him off or if she had something else in mind. Carefully, he pressed his hand into the contour of the couch cushion to keep it from trembling. He had to assume she was in a feral mood. It seemed reasonable. Last week at the preliminary hearing, the judge had bound her case over for trial and raised her bond to $1 million. A good indicator, the prosecutor told him, that the judge thought probable cause was an understatement. He guessed that's why she escaped when she had a chance. She was facing years in prison, might as well get out if she could. He calculated his odds. Any sign of fear would raise her hackles. Hey, hun, I took a shower and cleaned up a little. Hope you don't mind. Her voice was taunting. Dick looked at her, forced his mouth into a small smile. You surprised me. She smiled too, her expression knowing. I remember you like surprises. He hated surprises. He moved his head in a semblance of an acquiescent nod. What did she want? His mind was dulling into that old rut. Fear, desire, adrenaline. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs now, one hand in the pocket of the robe, one on the banister. Vaguely, Dick heard the news return from commercial. He willed it to be on a different story, and he felt a fresh rush of adrenaline when the anchor reiterated the hour's top headline. Prison guard dead in violent jailbreak, female inmate still at large, presumed dangerous. The anchor, a slight woman with sleek blonde hair and wearing a suit in a violent shade of red, seemed to relish the juicy story as she elaborated. The 32-year-old woman has been at large for over an hour after taking part in a plot to escape that involved 2 other inmates, both of whom are back in police custody. The suspect is a white female, 5 feet 7 inches, approximately 130 pounds. The guard, 12-year veteran Terrence Smiley, was pronounced dead at County Memorial Hospital earlier this morning. The sheriff's office has released a statement asking anyone with knowledge of the whereabouts of the suspect to contact them. They moved on to the weather. Dick couldn't think of anything to say. Jane was standing behind him. His mind was overloaded with images, thoughts, emotions. It felt like so many synapses were firing that smoke might start coming out of his ears, like a cartoon. He thought, I have knowledge of the whereabouts of the suspect. Somehow he felt more solid just thinking these words. It reminded him that the police were looking for her. Surely they'd check here, the scene of her last arrest. All this flashed through his mind in images. Jane, this little house with its sad lawn of struggling grass and patches of dirt, the street, a police car driving by and parking next to the chipped curb, an officer coming to ring the doorbell and knock. Safe. Somehow, simultaneously, Dick knew this was just a distraction. Sitting with his back to Jane was like having his bare foot within striking distance of a viper. He wondered if it would set her off if he stood. For the first time, he remembered his cell phone sitting next to his thigh. It was on his left side, and his left arm was draped on the back of the couch. If he moved it now, she'd be suspicious. Damn. While the newscaster was speaking, he hadn't noticed Jane move, but now she was lounging against the wall opposite the banister, both hands in the pocket of his robe. She sauntered closer, coming toward him through the patch of sun streaming in through the glass panels next to the front door. She was still so beautiful. Prison had filled out her cheeks a little. It was like deja vu, only instead of sex, he felt like it would be realistic to assume she had murder on her mind. You got new couches. Her lips curved in a crooked smile. The last couches were ones they'd bought together, and his brother and dad had hauled them to the dump, machete slashed and spattered with his blood, while he was in the ICU recovering from Jane's final horrific assault. 6 days he was in ICU, another 5 in the hospital. He'd nearly died, and Jane had gone to jail to await trial. That was 3 months ago. Well, 13 weeks and 2 days. It was correct, though. Dick had been keeping track, partly to know how long recovery was taking, and partly because he and little Ella were suspended in time waiting for the trial. He couldn't seem to settle into any kind of normalcy. Right now, he wanted to know if Jane had a weapon. There weren't many things that she could fit in the pockets of his robe. Usually her weapons of choice were pots and pans, dishes, knives, and rage. No way she could fit any of those in there. Also, she seemed calm, which he found both soothing and terrifying. He was tense. He was sweating. His blood was so high that his ear ached along the tender scar line. A weapon. A weapon. He couldn't gather his thoughts into the present. He thought instead, in a flash, of the assault. The machete. She'd found it in his hunting gear in the garage and sharpened it, he found out later. How in the hell did she know how to sharpen a machete? But the machete was gone. The police had submitted it to the crime lab for testing in anticipation of the trial. Post-op, the surgeon had commented to him during his rounds that the precision of the cut allowed him to reattach Dick's ear and part of his scalp so well that the scarring would be nearly invisible. "You're lucky for that, at least," he said. Dick remembered those words. "You're lucky for that, at least." Lucky. He felt lucky that Jane had left Ella with his mother before trying to murder him. He felt lucky that Ella was not here now, but was at a birthday party, unaware of any of this. Actually, he reminded himself, he didn't believe in luck anymore. And remembering that, he stood up. He willed himself to feel brave, to be capable of making a decision. He heard a faint echo of one of Jane's marital complaints. "For God's sake, Dick, man up and make a decision." He turned off the television, which was airing a commercial recruiting long-haul truck drivers. He turned to face her. "Why are you here, Jane?" She smiled. It was one of her seductive, playful smiles. This made Dick warier. Also, she was getting nearer. No more than perhaps 10 feet separated them now. Dick couldn't tell how that had happened. "I missed you." She looked around. "You didn't bring one of your office bimbos home today, did you? Where's Ella?" Dick thought of her swinging the machete, slicing his abdomen, nicking, he didn't know it until later, his stomach and a narrow sliver of intestine. He thought of how he bent and dodged and only lost an ear and some skin before he delivered a full frontal kick that knocked her over the back of the couch and gave himself a chance to get closer to the door. What the hell? He lunged for his cell phone, knocking his mug over. It clattered onto the floor, the tea washing over the coffee table. Jane lunged too. He had the phone in his hand, but before he could look away from Jane long enough to dial 911, she pulled out a gun. He froze. It was the little .22 he kept under the mattress. My God, he thought, how did she know where he kept his gun? Where's Ella? Jane's tone sounded casual. Dick was used to her rages, the way they would flash out, and she'd release a projectile, which he thought of as the fireworks, and then it was over. She was calm and sorry, and they'd make passionate love, the best sex they ever had, he used to joke with his brother, who thought Jane was a nut job and constantly wondered what Dick was doing still married to her. It's the sex, Dick would say, as if he were joking. Jim would shake his head and say, thinking with your dick is going to get you killed. He was going to die, for sure, this time. She had a look in her eye that he'd seen in dogs before they attacked. That flat, emotionless calculation of violence. It was nothing he'd ever seen from her before. It took forever to get to know someone, it seemed. He'd known Jane for 6 of the longest years of his life, and still she surprised him. What did that mean? That probably meant something. The last time, as he'd started calling it, she'd attacked him, screaming, from behind, apparently trying to knock him out with the metal handle of the machete. He wasn't sure. And he turned into the struggle without getting a good look at her expression. Had it been like this one? He needed to think. He needed to calm her down. He had to try to convince her that he wasn't a threat. He held up his hands, still holding the phone like a lifeline in his left hand. No problem, Jane. Ella is at Marcy's for Kinsey's birthday party. Her eyes narrowed. And did you bring one of your floozies home? Dick wanted to shout at her that this wasn't her home anymore, that they'd been divorced for over a year, that she'd tried to kill him, and if it weren't for the FedEx guy ringing the doorbell as he dropped off a package, Dick would be dead. He started to say no, he hadn't brought anyone home. Then he realized that he was falling back into their old patterns of communication. The therapist had warned him about this. Think, he thought again. Think. I brought someone home. She's not a floozy, though. He glanced over Jane's right shoulder in the direction of the kitchen, as if to imply she was in there. Jane raised her eyebrows, watching him, then blinked lazily. The gun never moved. She kept it trained on his chest. Finally, she shook her head. You're not smart enough to go up against me, Dick. He shrugged, raised his own eyebrows. Jane turned her head slightly to the right, as if trying to get a sense of someone in the next room. She's awfully quiet. They stood in silence a moment. Dick tried to think of some non-obvious way to make noise, to disrupt her listening for someone, but he couldn't think of much with that gun pointing at him. It was cocked. Jane lifted her head slightly, as if she were trying to catch a scent. I think you're lying to me, Dick. She moved a few steps, positioning her body between him and the front door. And what are the chances that the FedEx guy is going to show up, huh? This time, I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to take Ella, and we're going to go live someplace far away. Dick's mind felt like mush. He couldn't think of any way to solve this problem. His psychotic ex-wife was standing in his living room with a gun, loaded and cocked, pointing at him. There was part of a coffee table and couch between them. He couldn't possibly reach her before she fired. The FedEx guy had already come and gone. After dropping Ella at the party, he picked up the mail on his way in. There was no lady friend in the kitchen. Tiffany had offered to come, but he'd wanted to relax, maybe to sleep. Besides, Tiffany had started acting a little nuts sometimes, asking him almost obsessively where he was going and who he was going to be with, and Dick had had enough of crazy. Anyway, the point was, he didn't have a solution. He couldn't think. Think, he thought. Think. Why couldn't he think? He said, if you kill me, you're going to jail. Jane laughed. Dick felt stupid. It seemed like things weren't going to end well. He had to live for Ella. If only Jane would attack him. He'd rehearsed that thousands of times in his head. He was ready to hit her, even though she was a woman. As his brother said, stalking was one thing, but anyone who tried to kill you was fair game, woman or no. But Jane wasn't attacking. She was pointing that stupid little .22 at him. It was possible he could survive being shot, depending on where the bullet struck. Not that he wanted to get shot. He wanted a plan. If that involved taking a bullet, he would. But first, the plan. What was his plan? Why couldn't he think? Jane stood calmly, as if she had all the time in the world. And although she didn't know it, Dick knew she did have plenty of time. It would be hours before anyone grew concerned for him. If he didn't show to pick up Ella at Marcy's, Marcy would assume he'd fallen asleep, he'd mentioned a nap, and cut him some slack. He could play on with the floozy in the kitchen ploy, but she seemed pretty convinced that wasn't true. He could dive for her and start the fight. He could pretend he was having a heart attack. He could try and convince her that he wanted to have sex. He was honest enough to admit that at least one small part of him did. He dove. The gun went off. Jane had shot him. And while he lay there, Jane went upstairs and got dressed. A little while later, she came to check on him. She'd found some of her clothes that he'd been meaning to donate. He was wheezing, and the edges of his vision were going gray. He felt something close to affection for the familiar face. It seemed remarkably clear and still beautiful as she leaned in. "You know your problem, Dick?" She stood up, straddling his legs, hands on her hips. He couldn't think of it. "Your problem is you just can't figure out what your problem is." She left his line of sight, started a fire in the kitchen with what smelled like paper towels on the gas stove. She'd done that once before, and he recognized the smell. He heard the weather stripping on the garage door slide across the floor as she went out and came in. She'd gotten the hammer from the workbench. She hammered the smoke detector to uselessness. Then she took his keys from the counter and left. His lung hurt. Breathing was getting more difficult, and he only remembered his phone when he heard it ding a few feet from his still healing ear. Someone had texted him. I do need to say that's not taken directly from one of the cases I've read. I do write fiction.
After all.
As a poet, I find that I'm mostly fascinated by the small, sort of real moments, the idea of being present in our life, and also if I'm writing a story in my poems, I find that I'm interested in women and horses, which sort of sounds like something a man would say, but it's not the same. It's just, I think that, you know, being a woman, I'm watching the women I love, like my grandmothers and my great aunts and even my mother age, and seeing the next seasons to come. And I'm so grateful that the women in my life have shown me hope and freedom and good things to come. So I'm embracing that. But here's a poem about a woman enjoying the quiet. Decades ago, she got used to the kitchen's sloping floor, always tilting her guests slightly toward the door, where she sits now with her second cup of coffee, steaming up into late morning light. No one to cook for, no hurry to finish. Around the corner are the narrow stairs, crooked as the index finger on her husband's right hand, both done with the same hammer the winter the third baby was due, and which now only creak when she goes up each week, disturbing the air to dust the quiet rooms. There's the summer porch with its sunny corner where the dingo whelped her litters, the screen door threshold once as scuffed and dusty as the ranch hands who used to sit around her table, bowing their heads to the formica before each meal, leaning in the direction of their work. Here is the small desk, neat as the corners of her bed, where she sits twice a month, working up the bills, filling in the ledger's columns in a hand she likes to think is as steady as always. The loneliest thing in the house these days is the dinner bell, and the telephone isn't much of a talker either. There's a little magazine called Sequestrum that recently published a couple of my poems and has a little interview. And I was so happy that they published some of my very favorite poems, and this was one of them. And this, the first draft, at least, of this next poem was written with a borrowed pen on the back of an old grocery list balanced on my knee. We were burying my husband's grandmother, a Cherokee Indian raised on a res in Oklahoma, who died in this tiny Texas town on the Llano Estacado. And for those of you who've been down there, you might know what that is, but she was an earthy, powerful woman, and her funeral was welcoming and wise, with tears and laughter and wild stories and raucous hymns sung at full off-kilter volume. Our family was still at the gravesite, and I sat in the cab of the truck to get out of the wind while I wrote. And this is called November Burial, Rawls, Texas. Only a few of us stay in the wind to watch the men turn the winch and lower the coffin into the grave. The Mack truck waits off to the side with its load of dirt. At the edge of the cemetery, cotton fields begin. The brown stems bristle in obedient rows. Farmers are stripping cotton for miles around. Wandering bulls settle the roadsides, roam white among the gravestones. We are quiet as the crew disassembles the clanging metal frame, placing its parts aside on the dry grass. Someone tells how often at dawn they've seen half a dozen deer come down off the caprock to take fresh flowers off the graves. Although I was raised all over the West following my dad's job in the oil field, I spent the most time living in California, and the Central Coast is one of the landscapes of my heart. So this poem remembers a common experience of my childhood visits to the beach. Digging clams. Among the snags of shells and stones, screaming gulls, seaweed's bones, where the waves draw back their quiet tongues, I squat on the dark tidal sand. I watch the shingled strand for a percolating crinkle, a siphon opening to the sky, where a little clam, shy, is buried, but not dead. And when I've dug it up and held its ridged shell, stroked the glinting armor layered luminous as pearl, and peered inside the dark fissure, wondering, I set it back into the slack hole, already soft with the seeping sand, and watch it wait to be buried again, rocking, rocking down into the dark to sip the sea. So when I came to Nebraska for college, I was a long way from home. And my English professor, one of my professors, and his wife took me into their hearts and welcomed me into their home. So they shared a lot with me, and I learned a lot from them. So Ruth recently passed away, and I have dedicated this poem to her memory. It's called Making Jam. The first spring after your stroke, the rhubarb in your garden raises its frilled green leaves on its stalks streaked with red. I collect them, stooping out by the alley under the apple tree, and with one clean stroke from my pocket knife, I cut each leaf away for compost. I take the stalks to my kitchen, prepare the jam as you taught me, sniff the sweet sour steam as it rises in the pot. When the timer goes off, I ladle it into jars, ruby red, and lick the spoon. One more. Let's do... Guess I'll do this one. It's a nice quiet poem. Walking a gravel road, first snow. Out of the wind-stripped autumn thickets of wild plum and lilac, a deer leaps down onto the road and stops to look at us. Fine flakes come gently, settle softly, as if heaven, blind with clouds, is feeling each branch, each withered leaf, each blade of grass, flake by patient flake, taking the measure of this place. Her coat is shaggy with winter growth. As she moves to go, each hoof flings a pat of snow that fragments in the air, dusting the prints she's leaving there. She crosses the corner of the stubble field, goes swift down the gully, over the leaning grasses, and is gone among the trees, taking her wildness, leaving a silence deeper than the snow.
Let's have another hand. One of the things we always talk about is the writer's community and how long it goes, how wide it is, how deep it must be, you know, for things like this to happen. One of the reasons that Jennifer got back into writing was the community that she ran into when she came to Crescent Moon. And that kind of started her in a different direction, which went into a different direction, which went into a different direction. How does that happen? And then here we are today. And Ed Stevens has talked about the years that he spent in Kearney working at Good Samaritan Hospital. He was there because he decided that Washington, D.C. was a little too much, and so he ended up in Kearney and in that group of people and started a bookstore, which started another community. Mary K Stillwell is a person that I ran into most directly when she was assembling all of those poems from all of those writers for Nebraska Presents. A great anthology, still on sale. I know it is. I've seen it in stores. A great collection of writers from across Nebraska who lived here or passed through here or worked here or went to school here. Greg Kuzma is here tonight. He has taught for years, and many of us have sat in his classrooms, either enthralled or falling over with laughter, but never asleep, I can tell you that. And that's part of the community too. Greg Kosmiski is here. He's with Backwaters Press, and so he's intimately involved with everything going on with getting books in publication. That's what happens. That's what makes a community work. So without further ado, what I will do is bring up Mary K Stillwell, and she will talk to you about what she's been doing lately. I have really no idea. I haven't really talked with. This is my chance to catch up. Mary K.
Thank you. I'm getting over some bronchitis, so if my voice goes too far away, just raise your hand and I'll try to get back. Rex gave me one of those moments that I could kind of witness Balboa, seeing the Pacific. Rex mentioned the anthology that Greg and I put together, Nebraska Presents, and when I taught poetry writing at the university, shared the anthology, and students got to choose the poets that they wanted to come and talk about. And so they'd have a few weeks to pore over the poems. Well, one of my students came into what I was trying to get across was that we have poetic voices all around us, and you are joining that community. And so I had a young student come in, just so excited. Rex is in there. Rex Walton's in there. He's my neighbor. Do you know Rex Walton? He writes poetry. She said, I know him. I know some of the things in that poem. So it's a real pleasure to be here. And it did make me feel like I was witnessing Balboa discover the Pacific, because she had learned that people in her community write poetry and love poetry. And she wasn't alone, and so it was a real special moment for me. I started today because I was, I guess, inspired by the sun. I was going to read a whole bunch of spring poems because it's spring. And so I was putting them together, and I realized, well, these are spring poems, sort of, but they're about time and change. So I sort of changed my theme. We also recently watched again the Paleo Sleuth, so that may be informing my collection or my selection tonight. It's been on NET again recently. So let me start with an invocation, and it's about the beginnings of our life, not our human life, but life on the plains, and they're coming into being. Invocation, there are 5 parts. In the beginning there was the thread, the sharp end of its own needle stitching into the earth as though it were beginning a story, the needle, the pen, the thread, the sentence, and then another, inventing a future made possible by the earth, stitching on, visible had there been light, were there someone to see. 2. Almost all versions begin in darkness or void or chaos, a yawning nothingness, a vast bounty from which Gaia emerged, or in one account with water, over which a mighty wind swept, and from which men and women climbed. Another begins with a bang. 3. Thread formed a delicate root, then a web. Soon earth, warmed by breeze, moistened by sea, revealed a tapestry of grasses, blue stem, grama, bearded needle, and a carol of bluebells that still ring across the plains. 4. Yucca, prickly pear, turnip, ground bean, squash, and the riverbank grape. Juniper, box elder, oak, chokecherry, cherry, plum. Nothing named yet. Rise up on the early pages, camels, rhinos, elephants, horses, rabbits, dogs, and wolverines. 5. When we came trailing along after the sun, we noticed the larger animals first. Tatanka, Hihaka, we began. And here is a spring poem. I don't know about you, but we have lilies of the valley that are taking over our backyard. And they've just come out maybe the last week, and the whole backyard is just this sweet smell of lilies of the valley. Sharp as knives, they pierce the dark plot with deep green blades, cutting into spring sunshine as clean as steeples. Within a week they will unfurl, unwrap into a swirl of promise. The fine muscles of a stem, shades darker, suddenly knobby, and then a drawing back of green, the ring of small white bells that sound this yard and the next with the fragrance of lilies, lilies of the valley. No small sounding. If one should pick them, and one should, anyone, a quick tug from the center, there is a squeak, a sigh really, a breath released, as after a sudden kiss, lilies of the valley, knife and bell, and bloom and heady scent, unexpected as love. I once had a teacher, Bill Packard, who said there is no such thing as a poem about a flower, that they're all about sex. So I think maybe he had OD'd on O'Keeffe or something. What's the saying? First comes love, and then comes marriage, and then comes you're pushing a baby carriage. So let me read, I guess, a poem from our honeymoon, and then some children poems. This is called Daylilies, and the only place other than Nebraska that I've seen so many daylilies is on Long Island. It's got that sandy soil that the lilies just love. And we honeymooned on a little island, narrow island, off Long Island called Fire Island. And there were just daylilies all over, all kinds of lilies. And I learned while we were there that there are over 1,000 varieties of daylilies. And there were a group of people going around finding out how many there were on Fire Island. So I'll mention some of the names of the various lilies. Ruffled apricot, master touch, grand finale. These are the daylilies. They grow everywhere. Here at Seaview, alongside country roads, schoolgirl or joyful occasion, cherry cheeks, prairie blue eyes. 3 years of variation, hilled bandit, pleasure, and patterned gold. If I were a cat, I would live among them, among the deep green arches and slender necks. I would listen to their fine-colored trombones. A soft, bright rain would fall around me. But I'm not a cat. We pin prayer flags in the backyard trees. Red and yellow ribbons ripple like butterflies in the breeze. We walk along the beach hunting colorful rocks and unbroken seashells. Sometimes we swim. The cat is unconcerned. She watches the bushes, guards on the back deck what she thinks is hers. She watches the prayer flags, couched with such intensity I think that she must be praying. Perhaps she also thinks them butterflies or birds. This cat does not yet know daylilies, although she has appeared in many poems and in many guises. Golden chimes, banded. This is the first poem in which my husband appears as my husband, as in we pin prayer flags and we swim. I pray to the daylilies, natives of China and Far East places. They are a crisp and lovely magic, and their flower lives one day through. Ambrosia and lemon lily, they have bloomed one on the heels of the last on Olympus and Eden, joyful occasion and patterned gold to this very summer when we hunt colorful rocks and unbroken shells. Red and yellow ribbons ripple in the breeze that lifts the corners of the bright orange flags. The cat is in her glory. Sometimes we swim. When we came out, I was living in New York there. I'm from Omaha. But I lived in New York for many years, and when we came out in 1988, it was part of a book tour. And Moving to Malibu had just been published by Sandhills Press. It was part of the Plains Poetry series, and we went out to Kearney, and we met the Welches, and it was a wonderful introduction, coming back to Nebraska. And at the time, we were kind of late in deciding we wanted children, and we were kind of, thinking about that. And of course, as you get older, the incidence of all sorts of birth defects and stuff increases. So being the shy people we were, we told everyone that we met what we were thinking. And I remember Donn saying, "You should adopt. We adopted children. You should adopt." So we went back, not just based on his suggestion, but the suggestion of others too. And we decided to take that route. So we have many reasons to thank Donn and Marcia and my family. So I wanted, and we adopted through Columbia, because we were over 40 at the time, and you couldn't adopt American children through the New York state agencies when you were older than 40. And so we went to Columbia. And so this poem takes place as we visited Columbia. And when you adopt a child, I think from someplace else, you make it your business to learn as much as you can about the culture, because you're going to be the main source of inspiration for them in their early lives. And you take pictures and all this stuff. And so we visited a lot of museums. You have to stay there. It's a lengthy adoption, or it was a lengthy adoption process. And so this is Wayfarers in a Familiar Land. It's about a trip to a museum. And we have our son, Will, with us, who's now 27. Wayfarers in a Familiar Land. On exhibit at the Universidad de Antioquia. First floor lobby, Escher prints in the gallery, bones and stones, remnants that we are invited to touch. Each description is also in Braille, white mountains on white land, which keeps, like the Andes, it's secret. Do not go gentle, the museum guide begins. In an alcove, we discover the works of a painter whose colors are our own, and the curator, a young, lithe man whose son's place of birth, Casa de Maria, is our own son's place of birth, and he joins us. He folds us into his arms like visiting relatives. When he goes, I am bereft. But our host points the way, and we, with the help of his friend, hoist the stroller 2 flights up to the lighted permanent collection, each case customized. Another guide steps from the shadows, a shade to accompany us. Lights jump, articulates pots and pipes, tools and jewels, translate like the wind into fabric stencils, burial chambers, read like bones. And suddenly, elementary school boys in navy pants and white shirts launched 7, 8, 9,000 years ago, crashed into the great hall and swirl around us. Like first life on land, they dampen everything as though the glass were sand. They bunch up to flow out, only to wash back to study us. They whisper to one another before growing bold. They produce their notebooks. Luis writes his name and Medellin again and again for each of them. Olaf signs his name and Stockholm. I follow my husband, who is listed alongside his name, Alemania, to write mine, and Omaha. They point to our son, Colombiano? See, we say, and with the murmur of low tide, they rush out again, carrying our names with them, while we stay to honor their ancestors, whose features we will carry into our distant land. Our daughter was here earlier, and she had to leave to catch a bus. But in between Will and Anna, we adopted or were on our way to adopting a little girl, Chloe. And it turned out that when we got to Bogota for her health exam, they found out that she had a multitude of neurological problems, and she had, in fact, been born without part of her brain. And so you deal with that as best you can, and you grieve it over time. And this happened, 25 years ago, 26 years ago. And then just a couple years ago at Ashfall, when we were at the fossil site, I told you I'd been into paleo sleuths. Suddenly all the grief came back in the rhino barn. So this is a poem visiting Ashfall, what continues and what is gone. So the sky turned gray, the world turned black and white, like photographs in my grandmother's candy box, like the film on the light box in the hospital in Bogota, where the doctors gathered to point and we gathered our daughter into our arms. The wind blew gray shards from the west, dirty snow no one watched, no camera, no CAT scan. Animals gathered at the watering hole. The fetus grew as the rhino caught her breath between each long gulp. The colt nursed between the legs of its mother, and the crane lifted its beak to swallow the lizard, another a mouse. Sharp ash sounds like sleet when it falls. Lungs filled with thyme, shrew, hedgehog, snake, deer, bullhead, bird, bear dog, camel. Fell for days, had there been days, like the day after days we passed with empty arms, ourselves to sleep, while the west wind cried through the dark nights. Grief blooms from exposed curve of old bones, from fragments still buried like shrapnel. The sun shines, rain comes, cemeteries fill, grass pushes through the crust, now pitchers sage. As your children grow up, you sort of let the past go and you worry about every single present moment. And so this is a poem. When we were in Greece, and you know, Athens is named after Athena, and people still pray to her and bring her gifts and bring her flowers, and she's very alive to them. And I thought that was just wonderful. Here's a goddess that goes back, thousands of years, and she's just as there as she was, thousands of years ago. So we came home, and our son was going off on a trip with his buddy their first road trip, you know, after high school. And so I'm having heart palpitations. And so I said, well, I'm going to pray to Athena. And then I thought, no, I'm going to send her an email. I mean, it's the 21st century. And the subject line is road trip. Keep our son Will and his friend Russell safe on their drive, and when they reach Minneapolis, add John to your care. Protect and aid them as you once did Telemachus on his journey. Just as you gave the people of the new city on the hill olive trees for shelter, warmth, and food, give our young men roadside assistance should it be required on their excursions on to Toronto. Keep them safe from pickpockets and ne'er-do-wells. Advise them where to go for fun. Show them a good time. Should they require it, show them the way home. And I guess let me end with a new poem, because I think time goes quick when you're reading poems. And this, I want to try this poem out. It is a very new poem. I've always been enchanted by Gray Kuzma's long poems. You can move into them and live in them over time. I don't write long poems, right? So it's been very disconcerting. So sometime over Christmas, there was some celebration of T.S. Eliot, and his 4 quartets were online, so I started reading them. And I know that there's, Kwame Dawes has talked about dialoguing with poems to get going and get writing. So I started dialoguing with the 4 quartets. I don't know what possessed me, other than it was Christmas and I probably had too much glog, I don't know. Anyway, this is one of, well, the only of my quartet that I finished. There are 5 sections, and it's called The Island. And I should say, those of you who know us know that we like to go to Maine during the summertime, so part of the poem is set in Maine on an island. 1, time, whatever it is and however we measure it, passes. The only certain action or speculation holds interest. So let us go there, breathe their perfume before we troll for pretty shells, sea and salt-frosted glass. The summer of life passes, and soon enough autumn nods to winter and withdraws. The birds that nested on the rim of the plate before we married watch as our fledgling children ride currents high above the tide. Before heading home, we walk on to a further beach, the one we call ours, with other roses. We will pass the goats that no longer climb the ramp into the tree on the road. The vole no longer crosses our path, your hand in mine. There is no going back, only this and the next new moon preparing itself in the folds of night. Governments rise and fall, eyesight fails, and we tend to our needs, to that sweet rose, your hand in mine, this walk, the hidden moon. 2, we conquer nothing, and that's the secret. We simply crawl, stand, step, and then we run. We walk alone, and if we're lucky, together, and if we are unlucky, alone again. This is all there is, and that has to be enough. The walk takes us to the beach where the scent of rose greets us. We pull the bloom close, and we walk the sand. Presidents declare war, and the new moon rises, and when no one's looking, we dance. The gulls watch and chat among themselves. The heron parts the reeds with dignity and grace, strikes, raises its elegant neck, and swallows the world whole. My hair turns gray, my eyesight fails. What did I say? Give me strength to keep walking, though I know it does not conquer time, whatever that is, or even slow it. However presidents and astronomers measure its passing, nothing redeemable. 3, meantime, industry ravages the earth. Not all industry, you say? How many industrial stamps on the point of a pin, while whatever time is draws nigh. We are unredeemable, no need to split hairs. Christianity, dry sticks with which to burn our souls to ash, is apparently unredeemable. Blessed are the bold, rude, and boastful. Pass the plate. The Bible has become a ransom note. God's busy fiddling with the antenna to get a clearer picture of the televangelists ministering to industrialists bent on destroying the earth, beach, gull, rose, bowl. Night falls here and on the prairie, where the heron also walks at the river's edge, watching and diving, tossing and swallowing, before winter closes the door on night. Earlier, red-winged blackbirds, chevrons flashing, sent a battalion south. Cardinals hold down the fort, listen to their call. Walk here too, they advise, while the section road still runs along the fence. Night falls. Fragrance of the roses perfumes the air. 4. Turn off the news. Time, whatever it is, for bed where we will walk the beaches of sleep. Time, whatever that is, to wake and decorate the tree, to color the eggs, to walk to school, to set out our May baskets. Let them pray to the God of oil and the God of greed. 5. Come, let us walk, you and I, holding hands into the night. Movement ceases with each step, prairie or island, and we have only the step along the road the vole no longer crosses, that runs by the goats that no longer climb the ramp into the tree, onto the beach that is ours. We will hold the rose between our fingers to smell its sweet, sweet scent before we walk into that last dark tide. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Let's have another hand from Mary K Stillwell. We will again bring Donn Stephenson up for 2 or 3 more songs. That'll be great. And then we have our benediction poem as usual. Every month, a benediction poem from the great book, Bill Clifcorn's collected works. Terry never tells me what he's going to read, so I'm waiting for that. While we're waiting for what the poem might be, Donn will play us a few songs.
Well, I especially want to thank everybody tonight for having me over. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Mary. I sure enjoyed all of your work tonight. How wonderful it is. And I'm going to close out with some songs here tonight by some other people. And I have a special affinity for a fellow that they used to call the singing mailman. And there you go. He's also known as the Mark Twain of music, I guess, these days. So I'd like to do this one because Rex was a mailman. He sold my buddy all the stamps that the post office had down there, I think. Didn't you? Yeah, yeah. Let's see here. Well, maybe I can squeeze 3 in here if they're not too long. What do you think?
3's good.
Okay, all right. see what kind of fire begets a fire, like torches thrown into a straw. No one asks and no one answers. That's how every empire falls. Thank you. I shouldn't wear it. My wife made me take my button off before I came over here tonight that said something that wasn't nice about Mr. Trump. She was afraid some of you might be offended, and I said, hey, they're all artists over here, you know what I mean? So I wish they'd get him out of here before our empire falls, I'll tell you that. So, all right, I'm going to do another one by him. And this is a song about a man who's developed a special ability over a number of years. He's able to travel in his mind, particularly when his wife just goes on a little bit too long about something that he hasn't done.
That never happened. That never happens.
I read about this guy. It's not me.
Good.
I don't want to make any of you ladies mad tonight, so I don't know who this song is for, you know, but haven't been married 48 years. I got a hunch who it's for. So. Why do you always have to criticize me? Seems everything I do just turns out wrong. Why don't you just come on out and despise me, so I could pack my bag and baby I'd be gone. Remember when you used to call me honey? I'd turn around and call you honey too. other side of town. In my mind, I'm on the other side of town. I'm going to the dog racing side of town. I'm going to finish up with one tonight here. Like I say, I'm doing these they're by other people, and I do like lady singers and guitar players better than I like the men. I think their voices are much better. I think they're more talented, and my wife knows that I like them all anyway. So this is by one of the probably the most prolific lady songwriters of all time, Joni Mitchell. I don't know if any of you know her or not. Probably never heard of her before. Any of you around here in 1988? Yeah, I'm just checking. I didn't know for sure. By golly, I learned something today though. I learned how to do tofu. Throw it in the trash and grill some meat. There. You know, so. My wife and I were on a trip and we were coming home. She's got this radio station that pulls in everything from all over the world, I guess, and gives us a program by some people that they think we might like. And I hadn't heard this song for years. Joni wrote this back in 1988, and she never released it until 1991. But we started singing it and we couldn't stop. And so I'm going to close with this one tonight. so much. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and are safe driving home and that. Thank you, Rex, for having me over tonight. It was a pleasure.
And now the benediction poem by Pastor Terry. Our selection this month. He said it's a little longer. That still didn't give me much of any clue. So I'm waiting as much as you are. Pastor Terry.
Thank you. I just want to thank Don and Ed and Jennifer and Mary Kay. You guys were all great. Really a privilege to be a part of this whole scene with Rex. Rex read at my workshops reading last night at Gianni's, and it was really a success. So anyway, I wanted to read a sports poem, a poem that Bill participated in. So I found one about basketball, but of course, like all Bill's poems, it's much more than that. It's a little longer than what I'm used to, so I hope I do it justice. It's called Waiting to Gel. We are waiting to gel. Woods with this easy, high-hanging hook shot is somewhere south of the Mason-Dixon line, waiting to gel. In the heart of South Central Kansas, Bullard speaks gently to his bulldozer, coaxing it deeper and deeper into the earth. He is waiting to gel. Anspa, waiting to gel, is bottle-feeding a naked caveman with Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. Skeeter, an instrument in one eye like a telescoped lens, is putting together a necklace made of dime stores. He too is waiting to gel. And Clefcorn, having swapped the hogs, turns up the wick on the lamp, and with a fresh quill, plucked for the nether eye of a non-committal goose, writes on and on about waiting to gel. He himself waiting to gel, while recalling Bo Spoon, the coach, who filled every halftime with the same incredible prediction. One of these times, boys, we are going to gel. We won 3 and lost 17. With the diamonds in Bo Spoon's eyes cut through and halved our doubts, left us reaching for season upon season, for times and places and turnabouts, then as today unborn. Thus we move and breathe and pivot our understandings, waiting to gel. Woods at center, Bullard and Nasbot at forwards, Skeeter and Cleflorn at the guards, the Bulldogs, the starting 5, waiting to gel. Dust, meanwhile, swirls at the feet. Coins like rain reverse a trend. Roll as if players to stage center, wobble slowly down, evaporate. Spoon, having snapped his fingers and popped his left palm, smacks the inside of one Oxford heel against the inside of the other. It is halftime. We are far, far behind. The thick, steamy smell of socks leaks from consumed rubber shoes. Yet one of these days, boys, we're going to gel. And when we do, and the fine long fingers on Woods' right hand release the ball, it rises slowly to the peak of its arc, and by the time it reaches South Central Kansas, Bullard is already on his way home, the snort in the nose of his bulldozer quiet as grass. Anspa, pointing to an orange omen in the sky, shifts his text to a classic disease. And Skeeter, returning from one more meeting of the board, thanks his lucky stars that what goes down sometimes comes up. And the ball by now is so near the front limb of the basket that the multitude hushes. With a quill freshly dipped, Clefcorn writes the ball over the lip and into the stale magic center of the hoop. Slowly then it descends, seams turning slowly, and slowly the net fluffs and rises and falls, and the home portion of the gathering slowly erupts, comes slowly to its feet, its arms slowly outstretched, its mouth bursting slowly with tongues, all of them shouting slowly, blood, blood, blood. Bud Bullard, bone-weary and smelling of Lysol, is curled to sleep at mid-court. Ann Sparrow walks off with the cheerleader in the direction of Reno. Skeeter, having removed his tennis shoes, has marked them down to half price. And Woods, as if witching for water, extends his long hairless arms to follow his fingers out of the auditorium and along the white broken stripes on the southbound pavement. Alone, Clefcorn signals the crowd to remain calm. With the aid of a bullhorn, he announces that he is sent out for a new lampwick and a goose unmarked. Already he can see the fresh ink forming thin, sharp lines at the base of the busy quill. The face of Bo Spoon emerges, focuses, enters the dressing room. It is halftime. We are far, far behind. The thick, steamy smell of socks leaks of consumed rubber shoes. Yet one of these times, boy, we're going to gel. And when we do, dust, meanwhile, swirls at the feet. Coins like rain reverse a trend, roll as if players to stage center, wobble slowly down, evaporate. Breathing, I must believe. Believing, I wait. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. What a perfect poem. I think that's kind of our motto, maybe. You know, we're waiting to gel as far as that goes. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you for our writers and our readers and our people that have 2 eyes glued and 2 ears glued to what's going on. Thank you for the folks that drove a long ways. Thank you for those that didn't drive very far at all. You're equally appreciated. Thanks also, of course, to Mojave Cafe. Stop in here often, have some food. They have great flatbreads, salads, etc. I've tried everything, I think, at least once here. It's wonderful stuff.
Thanks.
What?
Thank you.
Oh, well, it wouldn't be here. If you know, what if you gave a party and nobody came? You know, I would probably sit over here and read poems for 2 hours to myself, but probably not on a microphone, as far as that goes. We'll be back here again first Thursday, 6 o'clock next month. Keep an eye out for your friendly email or something from Facebook. Okay? Good night.